Hello and welcome back to Project Posterity. My name's Philip and this is the second episode in our series entitled Marriage and Family Life. In this episode, Granny discusses Grandpa's family history, her eventful wedding day, the arrival of her first son, David, and Grandpa's career, including how they nearly moved the family to Australia. And it ends on them setting up the North Downs Clinic in Surrey. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the episode.
Well, hello, this is the second session of Project Posterity, and we've got Granny again.
Hello.
Hi, Granny, and we've also got Uncle David.
Hello there.
Great. And you might remember we ended the first session on a bit of a cliffhanger. So Granny had just met Grandpa at a party, and 2 weeks later she said that he proposed to her, and Granny said no. So I want to maintain that cliffhanger for just a bit longer and hear a little bit, Granny, from you about Grandpa's family. So what do you remember about his family?
Right. Well, not much remembrance because, in fact, a lot of them lived up in the north, the northwest. Liverpool and its surrounds, and they were in the far distant past. Perhaps they were shipbuilders, but they were also artists, solicitors. Quite a variable sort of background there. There was I can't remember how many children, but I think it was about 7, about 4 daughters or maybe 5 daughters and maybe a son, all well endowed. About 3 of the daughters came to live down south, and I did meet them. One lived in Bournemouth, one in London, and one in Hastings, and we did, after I was married and David was born, we took David around these aunts. One of them was married, 2 were single. And I also met his father before we got married, who cared for his mother, Granny Shaw, down in Rochester in Kent. I don't know how they came to be down there, but I only met his father once, and he said to me, look after each other and you'll be all right. I thought it was a very good bit of advice to give.
Yeah.
He lived with his mother in a flat above a shop, and I can't think what the shop was. And as a sort of little aside, which is interesting because his son followed his tastes up to a point in that when he died, we went down there and we found that he had died in his bed with a violin on the bed, a bottle of cherry brandy beside him, and that was typical of his son as well, wasn't it, David?
Yes, it was.
This is Grandpa's father.
Yeah,
right.
Yes.
And he was one of 7, or Grandpa was one of 7?
No, he was.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So where his sisters were down on the south coast. Yeah, I've sort of lost about what happened to the others. But the thing about it is to come back to his father. His father fought in the Great War, and he was gassed twice and then taken a prisoner of war.
Oh, really?
So
In
that,
France? Or?
well, I'm not too sure about that, where it was. And when he was discharged, he was told he must go and live in the country because the gas had affected his lungs.
Okay.
And so by that time, I don't know whether he had married Granny Cumby or whether at stage he got to know her, but he bought a dairy and he used to go around a pony and cart delivering the milk. Okay. And he always had a bad chest. I don't know at what stage he gave up the dairy and went and had his mother down and to look after her when she was ill and old. but they ended up in Rochester, as I've already mentioned. His father was never very well. He was an engineer by trade. He was never very well. And so I think he just sort of got through life, without making much of a career or anything like that. So that was a bit sad, really. Then on the other side, his mother's side, there were 6 of those, if I remember rightly.
Gosh, it's a big family.
2 boys, Sonny, who was a tailor. He was deaf and dumb, and he was a tailor. And there was John, who was a member of the London Auxiliary Fire Force, whatever.
Fire Brigade.
And there were, I said 6, I think there were 5. There were 3 girls, and they all lived in South London, or Sardistead in Surrey. John lived. Otherwise, it was mainly South London. And I did meet some of those, but not very often, except for John and his wife, May. And May is actually Alison's godmother, was when she was alive.
I have a memory of Grandpa driving to his brother John's funeral.
That was his brother.
Oh, his brother.
Okay. This is his uncle.
Okay.
Yes.
Too many Johns.
Yeah. He lived in Sardistead. Because he lived in Sardistead, we lived in Purley. They were very close together, so we did used to see them quite a bit.
Okay.
The others we didn't see very often. Probably at our wedding and never again.
Yeah.
As it happened.
I can remember going to John and May.
Yes.
May, his wife.
And then your father's mother and father separated then, probably due to the father's ill health, and Granny, it was during the war, she liked a good time and she couldn't have it with her father, because he couldn't do these things. So they separated and they moved up to London, and Granny did, to be near her parents, who took over to some extent the bringing up of John and your father. At some stage, when I think your father was about 7 or 8, maybe older, and they all got together again and went to live in Edgware. And your granny met up with Walter Charles Cudby, who she married and lived with for the rest of her life.
So this is Uncle David's granny. So my great-grandmother. Is that right?
The one we were talking about who's moved out to Edgware.
Yeah.
Was your grandmother.
That's right.
David. So it's Philip's great-grandmother.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, that's right. I'm sorry, it gets slightly confusing.
No, it's good to clarify.
Family that you don't meet is a little bit awkward.
Yeah. Grandpa was one of how many? How many siblings did he have?
There's just 2.
Just 2. John. Him and John.
Just him and John.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We saw very little really of his family, except for your grandmother, my mother-in-law. We saw her reasonably often, and then over time, she moved with Mr. Cubby, Walter Cubby, to take care of an old aunt on her mother's side, who lived in Red Hill. And also, at probably the same time, or much the same time, her father was on his own, and he came to live with them as well, in this tall old house in Red Hill. So there was David's grandmother, Walter Charles Cudby,
Her husband.
Granny's, her husband, yes, Aunt Gertie.
Oh, Gertie, yes, sorry.
All living together in this house. David's grandmother worked in the bank, in the National Provincial Bank, full-time, So she's a very, very busy lady looking after all these old people and working full-time anyway.
Which is the NatWest as it is today.
Okay.
Yes, just
Um,
How close was Grandpa to his only sibling, John? And how much did you see of John? I mean, I know we haven't got to sort of,
John was in the Air Force, based down in Cornwall.
Okay.
So at times we didn't see him very much at all. But then when he retired, he moved up to Surrey and we used to see them more often then. They got on well, in spite of the fact that after 15, when John became an Air Force cadet, I think they didn't see each other for a long time, but they always got on fairly well because they were two together, as it were. They stuck with each other through thick and thin, but we didn't actually see him an awful lot until he'd retired, when he bought his own aeroplane and used to fly down to Devon.
Oh, yeah, I think you've told me stories of him flying over the farm. Is that right?
Yes.
Signalling to you to go pick him up.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. So yes, they got on well together.
You always felt they did. I always felt they did.
Yes, they
They
did.
used to ring up each other on latter days, at least once a week.
Well, the story of Grandpa, driving to get to his funeral is a bit infamous, I think.
Oh, that's right.
Didn't he drive all the way up to London or somewhere?
Yeah, the last time he drove to London, I think it was.
Yeah,
And
and he probably shouldn't have, it sounds like. But he was determined to get there.
yes, he got there eventually.
Yeah, he lost his sight to some extent. He wasn't. It's difficult to describe how he was. He wasn't ill,
No.
but he wasn't quite with us. He wasn't demented or anything like that. He just wasn't quite with it.
Yeah.
I suspect his brother had died, and though he never ever showed his emotion in that way, I'm sure it hit him. I remember.
Oh, it did. It hit him very hard.
Hit him very hard. But I think for the rest of his life it hit him.
Yeah.
That's what I noticed when I, came down and I saw that, recognised that.
And part of that was because for some time, really, their mother wasn't easy to get on with. And so they were two together against her.
Yes, that is his only sibling as well.
Yeah, right.
Yes. So, so things weren't that easy with that family, but we sort of managed.
Yeah.
We never fell out particularly or anything.
Well, maybe should we circle back to how you ended up marrying Grandpa?
Well, really, how that's a funny question. How do you end up marrying someone? Well,
Presumably he proposed again.
he proposed again. Yes, that's right.
How long? Did he wait another 2 weeks or 2 months?
No. Quite a long time after that. Probably about 6 months after that.
Okay.
That's right. And then it was decided once we got engaged that we couldn't wait very long to get married because we wanted my sister Elaine to be present at the wedding, and at the time she was working as in a college of music out in Rhodesia. Okay. But she happened to be on leave, and this was in January 1952. And so we had to arrange. We had 6 weeks in which to arrange it before she was booked to sail back to Rhodesia.
You arranged a wedding in 6 weeks?
Yes. Wow. My poor mother must have gone demented.
Rhodesia being Zimbabwe as it is now.
Okay.
Yeah, just to clarify.
So, yes, there wasn't much time to sort of think about it. We still got on with it, And it happened on March the 29th.
So just tell us a bit about the wedding. Where did you get married?
We got married in Purley Congregational Church, which was my parents' church in Purley.
Yeah.
And the thing that stands out really was the fact that the weekend before it had been a lovely spring sunny weekend, and my future mother-in-law and order cubby had come over to have tea in my parents' garden and so on. They were all saying it'd be lovely next weekend. On the Friday night before Saturday of our wedding, there was a very, very violent snowstorm. And my father had had a marquee erected in the garden because the reception was to be in our home. And it meant that by the morning the marquee had collapsed.
Oh, no.
And so that the wedding reception had to be held in the house, which wasn't really big enough. But anyway, they managed. The car couldn't get up the hill to fetch me, so I had to go in my father's car, which was a rather bulbous sort of standard. I'd forget what number it was, but anyway, it wasn't that comfortable. But, so I ended up at the church with my father driving and me having to have a path cleared to get into the church and so on, and quite a few of the guests not able to come because the snow was too deep. However, enough turned up to make it okay. And then somehow or other, we all struggled back up to my parents' house, which was, as you probably gathered, up a hill, but we somehow managed it. And although it was a little bit squashed, it sort of went off all right. It wasn't great, but it was okay. And time came for us to go away. And David had left his car in a garage down in Purley itself, and his brother John was going to drive us down there to pick it up, and we were going off to Oxford. And so that happened, and we got down to the garage, and David sort of started the car, but he didn't start the car wouldn't go. So I was sitting in the freezing cold, because we didn't have a heater in the car, sitting in this bitterly cold car, thinking, if this is married life, you will keep it. I remember that quite well. And eventually we got okay. And we made the trip up to Oxford that night. I don't know quite how. And the thermos that my mother had kindly given us with a hot drink in that we stopped for had been leaking, so the drink was cold. And when we got to the hotel, they'd saved a supper for us, which was also cold. And it was about 10:30 at night anyway, because it took us a long time to get up there. But, however, that was our wedding. We had our honeymoon in Hereford.
Okay. Oh, so you went. Oxford was a sort of.
It was a sort of stopping place. Stopping away. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Where it was bitterly cold. All the time.
In Hereford.
Okay.
Yeah.
The snow was still on the ground. So I was quite pleased to get back to our flat. But the flat is another little story.
Okay, so tell us about your the first flat that you had then, Granny.
The flat we had was on Blackheath, South London. A very tall Georgian house, 4 floors. And we were offered this flat by my cousin, who was from the Hodgson family. Joy, her name was. Joy was my cousin Buncherbood, I think. But I used to see her a lot because she was a physiotherapist at Westminster Hospital when I was working in London.
Okay.
She had this flat she shared with a friend who was a doctor. And she was going to go back to live at home with a lot of old people because she felt they needed looking after during the air raids. So by the time I got married, the war had actually come to an end. But Joy had given up her flat some time before that, obviously, and said she didn't like the thought of it being empty. And would David and I like it? Well, of course we would. And it was £4 a week. And we came back there, and I went back to work. At that time, I was working in a pathologist's office at the Gordon Hospital in Victoria. And Father was still a lecturer at University College, a lecturer in anatomy at University College, but he changed soon after that to going back into surgery. So there we were in this flat. We weren't allowed to get to it through the house. There was an elderly couple living on the ground floor flat, and they regarded this house as theirs. And we were not allowed inside. They didn't even want us to park the car outside, but we had to do that anyway, so we weren't very popular. But this was fine, and I went on working. David started to come, not literally yet, but I mean, I did go on working for a while when I was pregnant, but it was quite a little journey into London where I was working, and time was getting a bit close. So I gave that up just before Christmas that year, and that was just before Christmas. It was still
1952.
1952. Yes.
So you got married, is it in March of that year?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
So by very shortly after you moved in, your father moved to taking up orthopedics at Great Portland Street in London. And for this, he had to live in about every other night and every other weekend. So I was alone quite a lot of the time, but I was working, so it didn't bother me. But once I'd given up working, I was on my own in the flat. And David was sort of getting pretty near being here.
When was David born? I don't actually remember.
The 6th of February, 1953, the same day as your grandpa.
Okay. So so this was December you stopped work, just a couple of months before?
That's right. Yeah. He came along in February.
I went the 6th.
And by which time, as I say, your father was living in hospital most of the time. So I was fairly alone in this top flat.
With these unhelpful
neighbours. However, David fortunately chose to arrive at one of the nights when your father was home.
Oh, good.
So that was lucky for me. So we were able to go in a taxi up to Charing Cross. And because I had David in Charing Cross Hospital, and Great Portland Street, where your father was working, was just pretty well round the corner, not quite, but not far away, he was able to come and see us and so on. The ward I was on had a sister who was quite fierce, but who was well disposed towards us because father had worked on her ward when he was training, and he got on well with her, so she was well disposed towards me, really, and looked after me quite well. And your father was able to come round fairly often.
Okay, so there's no such thing as paternity leave back in the 50s?
Oh, gracious, no.
No. Grandfather just carried on working.
Nothing so soft.
Just popped in.
On working. That's right.
Gosh, okay.
And, so your father was able to come and fetch us home from hospital. I seem to think we didn't have, or he wouldn't have driven the car out to London to fetch me anyway.
You said you went by taxi, didn't you?
Yes, right. And then, of course, he had to leave the next day, and there I was with a new baby. But by then, of course, we'd had to buy a pram. And this was a bit of a problem, because not being allowed to walk through the house, I had to collapse the pram every time we went out, take the pram down. I think it was about 4 fire escape flights of stairs with the platforms in between.
Yeah, it was sort of metal outside the building.
Right.
Forest at the back of the building.
So I'd collapse the pram, and then I'd go up and fetch David and put him in it. Yeah. Reverse procedure every time we came back.
Cool.
And it was quite hard going, but I was young, and there we are. That's how it was.
Had your sort of time in nursing prepared you for having a baby? Did you feel sort of like you knew what you were doing, or you had...
No way.
Okay.
Strangely enough, I'd never worked on the obstetric wards except just a few relief nights, that's all, when I was occupied just bringing warm blankets down from wherever one got them from and wrapped them around patients as they came back from the labour ward. That was all I ever did.
Okay.
So no, and there were no anti-natal classes or anything like that. Then you went along to make sure you were okay about once a month, I think, if I remember rightly. Otherwise, you were sort of pretty well left to your own devices.
Yeah.
So there we were, and I think my mother worried herself sick, but I managed. And but you were quite a good baby. When you did cry at night, I got very anxious because underneath in the middle flat there was a single lady called Miss Judy.
Okay.
And Miss Judy complained bitterly because the baby was crying at night, and then of course that made me anxious. And that made the baby cry even more.
How considerate of her.
So there we were, and eventually, David decided to take us try and get the higher exam of FRCS, for which he had to go on. I think it was a 6-month course, but I can't quite remember, which cost us a lot of money, which we didn't have. But we borrowed from that. And of course he was living at home, and so, I wasn't on my own when he was doing that. That was fine. We then decided it was time we got a house. We weren't welcome in the flat. They made it very obvious. And in any case, one of the stipulations was really you can't have babies in the flat. But because I was a relative of Joy, they sort of let that pass a bit. Thought we must find a flat. Took a little while, a house, took a little while to find it, but we eventually found one in Purley. And I must say my mother-in-law was a bit cut up about that, because we moved near my parents and not her. But we found 50 Godstone Road, and it was a 4-bedroomed house with 2 living rooms, dining rooms, and living room, and there was a breakfast room and scullery, and quite a nice little garden. Do you remember it?
I remember the garden because I actually used to start mowing the grass there.
Oh, wow.
About 5 or 5. And I can remember the day that your mother was born very, very clearly.
Yeah. So how long were you at this house? And was it Godstone?
5 years. Godstone Road. It was on the Eastbourne Road.
So so David would have been just before you turned 6. You moved again.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yes. We moved because they were going to put a roundabout directly opposite our front garden.
Okay.
So it didn't seem awfully good to be having children running around where there was a busy roundabout. So we were very lucky, and we found a beautiful house in the nice quiet part of Purley, which had 5 bedrooms and 2 big living rooms and a breakfast room and a big kitchen and a big garden.
Lovely place.
It had been neglected because it had been rented for well over 20 years, and those people hadn't looked after it particularly. It's so neglected that we had to more or less cut our way into the front door. It was overgrown. However, because of that, we were able to buy it for
4,300. That's what you told me.
4,300.
That's what you told me.
5-bedroom house.
Gosh. Okay.
And sold it for 55,000.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Right, so at the going price at the time.
Was this so you were there for quite a? So just to recap, so were all of your children born in? Was it Godstone House or you? They
Yes, they were all born in Godstone Road, but Alison was very young when we moved.
She doesn't remember Godstone.
Yeah. How many years between Uncle David and my mum, Alison?
Well, I was born in 53, and Alison was born in 58.
Okay.
In 1950.
Okay, so that's 6 years. Yeah. Okay, so mum was just there for what, a matter of weeks?
Yeah, it was sort of a month or 2.
Okay.
From June to February.
Okay.
Yeah.
We moved out. We moved into Peaks Hill on the 29th of February 1959.
Okay, so Peaks Hill is is that the family home that
Yes.
you guys would
Yeah.
remember growing up?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
We were there, I think, 18 years,
20 years.
20 years.
Gosh, okay.
Right. Yeah, very much the family home. Yeah. Had my sister on the parallel road, Elizabeth, but her...
Elizabeth, okay.
Yeah. But
Auntie Lane still in Rhodesia at this point?
in Rhodesia, and then she came back to live at home.
Okay.
And at that point, she's in it. Yeah.
And so your cousins, David, but Fiona, Alistair, Fiona, and Ian. So it was very nice. We didn't get in each other's way, but they were there, helped each other a lot. Because it really was, they were so near, but not near enough to be a bit irritating.
So very different to the flat in Blackheath.
Very different.
Sounds like you had much more support.
We had much more support.
Easier with the pram.
Our neighbours were lovely, and my parents weren't far away, so it was good.
And what was Grandpa doing in this time?
He was doing a lot of different jobs, learning all the different varieties of surgery. He worked at the St Peter's and St Paul's in London, near Charing Cross Hospital, which were dealing with urinary diseases, and St Mark's, which dealt with bowel diseases. He did the orthopaedics when around the time David was born, and he was a registrar then, which was you get in the hierarchy, as it were. You get you're a houseman, and then you're a registrar, then you're a senior registrar, and then you're a consultant. Okay, that's how it goes. And he'd done his house jobs much earlier on after medical school. He did well. He got 3 jobs, one after the other. Had his teaching hospital, which is, it's good. So by the time he'd finished these courses, where he'd been a registrar, he was well trained. And one of the things which was making life difficult for him was that during the war, a lot of the doctors in training, when they finished their training, they were called up. Our father was still, he's still a medical student. Yes, he was still a medical student. Near the end, and towards getting his degree, when he decided he probably should join up too, his brother was in the RAF now as a navigator. Thanks so much. Yeah, that's right. He thought he should do his bit, but they wouldn't take him because they said he'd be much more use to them if he finished his training and joined up then if he was needed as a fully qualified surgeon. So he didn't do it. By the time he was ready to join up, the war was well over, and all the chaps who'd gone in, quite rightly, were given jobs when they came out. And it was then for father's generation, they were all his lot were the same pickle. They could not get jobs. So they were doing locums, they were going all over the place, doing odd locums here and there, just trying to keep a living, finding it very difficult. There were about 100 applicants for each job. And unless you knew someone, it was pretty desperate, really. And he didn't know, well, he knew the people that he'd worked for. They were the people, obviously, you get references from. But unless you had even more contacts of some sort, which could be useful to you, it was very difficult for him. And he didn't really have anyone that he knew apart from those he'd worked for who would give him a reference, or somehow or other use their influence to get him a job somewhere.
Okay, so what?
So they doing odd locums, going all over London and areas around in his lunch hour, doing one job in the morning, one job in the afternoon. At one time, he was driving from Watford right down to, I think it was somewhere like Sutton or somewhere like that. He was doing that in his lunch hour.
Yeah, Epsom, possibly.
Epsom. That's right. Thank you. And this went on for some time until he felt, we had 4 children, we wanted to educate them. He felt he had to do something about it. So he applied for a job in Australia to work with an English GP who in Australia, then I don't know if it's still so, the GPs did a lot of surgery as well.
Okay.
This chap wanted an English surgeon to come out and do that work for him. And it's in a place in the southwest of Australia called Manjimup.
Okay. Southwest, so quite remote, was it? Southwest?
Yeah. Well, it was actually 4 hours drive south of Perth.
Gosh, okay.
So
Western Australia.
Yeah, Western Australia, which is the nearest to England as you can get as far as the scenery is concerned. It was well treed and reasonably green fields because they got more rain than anywhere else pretty well. And he enjoyed that for quite a while. And this GP, he didn't particularly go for the GP himself or his housekeeper because he wasn't married. But he got a nice, interesting list of stuff for father to do out and around Manjimup. So a lot of travelling involved with it, but they were country hospitals, relatively ill-equipped, but he felt that was good experience because you had to make do and mend. And he got through this long list and said, well, what's next? And this took about sort of 4 months or so. And so this chap said, well, I haven't got any more on my list. You're going to have to hunt around now. So he did. He did get more work. But what he was up against was that they don't have any national health service and the people weren't paying their bills. And so his income was very sketchy.
Okay.
And in the meantime, he was having to send money back to us.
So wow. So what? When do you remember when Grandpa went to Australia, and sort of how old were your children? How old was Uncle David? And
well,
he went in 1961, and he went on a £10 ticket to Australia.
Okay.
They did that then, where professional people, law people, they were looking for various skills, and you could come back for £10 as well or something within it. He went in, we tried to work this one out, which month. He certainly went in the summer of 61 and came back in December.
I think he went in July.
Yeah. We think it's July 1961 or thereabouts, but came back just before Christmas.
Yeah.
Okay. You would have been 8, and Simon would have been 3. I would have been 3.
Yes.
Wow.
I remember that very much.
Do you remember him going?
Yes, I remember the day he went and when he was going. My grandmother, that's Maddie's mother, looked after us for the day, and he told me to look after the mother while he was away.
Yes.
And we went off to school and came back, and then you went off with your father, didn't you?
Well, I went with my father to see him off, and also my mother-in-law came along as well. And my father bravely said to my mother-in-law, I'll take you out to lunch. And I went into London and had lunch with my old friend, my old playmate, Barbara.
Barbara comes back. She comes to Canada.
Yes.
How are you feeling on that day? You must really have mixed emotions.
Very mixed, yes. Because the idea was that we should follow him out.
Okay.
And in those days, you didn't you did fly because David flew, but it was very, very tedious. It was 24 hours and it was stopping off at all sorts of places. So we decided we should go on the boat.
So we had it all booked up to emigrate, basically.
Yes. And my parents were a bit upset.
The house just about to be lit out. Everything, wasn't it?
The house was going to be let out, that's right.
And he said no, didn't he?
Then he said because he'd got these bad debts and the travelling was too much for him because he was travelling 200 miles or so every day and it was very, very hot.
Gosh.
The temperature was about 40.
Yeah.
and he couldn't see the future there, particularly as he had to send money back home and so on. So what happened, in fact, was that when he left me a number of forms to fill in, just in case, if I kept my eye on the medical journals, I should see a job that I felt, he would like to do, that he very likely might get.
Yeah.
Because there weren't very, very many of them, of course. But
no such thing as the internet, so you couldn't check.
That's just nothing like that. No, nothing like that. It was letters, and they took 5 days or more to come.
Yeah. Is that how he communicated with you from Australia, or could he call you, or was there no?
He could, but it's terribly expensive.
Okay.
It's about £1 to
send tapes to us, the old-fashioned tapes.
So recording.
Oh yes,
Some voice recording, and letters.
And letters, yes.
And did you have with the phone conversations just for the sort of most important moments?
Hardly ever, because they couldn't afford it.
It was lovely to hear his voice.
Yeah, he did phone up from time.
We would, I think, leave it to you, boss, and we leave it to you to talk, because he.
Oh, that's all right.
Yeah, we used to say hello, and was it? But we could hear him when on a tape reel, and he'd be telling us what he's doing and ask how we were, and then we would record something and send it back to him.
Wow. Okay.
And then, for instance, Keith was wondering why he didn't answer back, because he had a real honest example, And then I don't know about your mum. What she allowed to ask that one, what she thought, because she's quite young then, wasn't she?
Yes, she was. Then.
So that's an original voice notes. Now you can use WhatsApp, can't you? Record a message.
Now it's ring, obviously. Yes. So what happened next was that a doctor, a GP from
Grimsby.
Near Grimsby.
Yeah.
Phoned me up and said, could you speak to David Shaw, please? I said, I'm awfully sorry, he's not here at the moment. When would he be back? He said. I was a bit cagey.
Yeah.
And I said, he's just away at the moment. Oh, well, he said, I wanted to him, if he was free, to come up here to do a locum. So I thought, this is the time to come clean. And I said, he's in Australia. And there was a long silence. When will he be able to come back? He said. And this was a person who he knew, I don't know where in his career he'd met him, but he'd worked with him sometime, and they got on very well together.
Yeah.
And I said, but I could get in touch with him today if you really think that he is suitable, to come up. Scunthorpe, that was her name. And he said, oh yes, I'd be glad if you would.
Yeah.
So then I thought I knew where he was. I knew that he'd left the GP and was then staying in Perth and hunting around for jobs. So I thought, how am I going to get hold of him? Anyway, I rang the hotel, and they marvellously said no, he wasn't there, but they thought they could find out for me where he was.
Mm.
And I don't know how they did it, but they got on to a telephonist somewhere who got in touch with him. And I don't know to this day how it happened. And they would make sure that he rang back within the next few hours.
Mm.
And he did. And I said, whatever his name was, I was trying to know if you'd like a locum up with him, with the prospect of being appointed to the consultant job, which is, just what he wanted.
Mm.
Not necessarily in Scunthorpe, but certainly that was the job he wanted.
Yeah.
So he said, I'll ring you as soon as I made arrangements. And he rang fairly shortly. He made all arrangements, and he was back in this country in 24 hours, was it?
Well, he came back on the 23rd of December.
Yeah.
Gosh, so he was at this stage, he was in Perth looking for something else. So he was between jobs, so he could just drop everything.
Yeah, that's right. We didn't have any ties, particularly, so I needed little to get work. And we also were running short of money because he wasn't able to send any back.
Yeah.
So I was absolutely thrilled to bit because school fees were coming up, and I knew I hadn't got money. Anyway, he came back. And because the flight was so tedious, and he came back, went straight to bed and slept for hours. And by the time he woke up, it was Christmas Eve, and we were able to go out and buy the kids presents, and But then we get back to South Scunthorpe again, and this GP said, "Well, come up as soon as you can, immediately." In other words, And so he did. We had Christmas Day, Boxing Day. That's
the day afterwards, he went up.
Do you remember Christmas Day with Grandpa back from Australia?
Yeah.
I remember him coming back, and Granny's saying he's going to be very excited, and I wondered why I was going to be so excited because I didn't really understand it.
Yeah,
that he'd have. And I remember him coming back, but also I remember him going. We were all crying our eyes out because he's gone again.
up to Scunthorpe. So he came back from Australia and went somewhere equally as far.
Came back from a temperature of about 40 to Scunthorpe, where there was a very, very cold spell going on with, frost and snow everywhere and ice on the roads.
Gosh.
But he got in the car and drove straight up there. And then he realised that this chap, his name was Dr. Bobia, that's right. He let him know that he would back him fully for the consultant's job if he liked to put in for it. And he said, "You better get your wife up here and make sure she likes it up here. Because, you'll be here for the rest of your career. She's got to like it." So I went up and saw it. I was amazed. I was expecting a sort of very industrial surrounding, but it was quite a lot of country and so on. Quite liked it. So, of course, we were both very happy about this.
I don't remember any of that.
And then what happened with the job? I don't think he got it.
Yeah.
Someone else was appointed, which was a bit disappointing, but he was happy to be back home,
Okay.
How
long was he in Australia for? Did you say 4 months?
Well, I think he went in July and he came back
December.
Christmas, end of December. So not very long. He was looking back on it, seems to be an age.
Within 6 months, but it wasn't 6 months, it was 5 and something.
Yeah.
And of course, we'd cancelled our trip by then and everything.
Yeah.
Bit disappointment there. We're looking forward to life on board, weren't we?
Good packing, things, got furniture in, and we.
Yeah.
All sorts of things.
Anyway, so that was it. So by the time he came back down from Scunthorpe, he was then on the same thing, looking for locums again, all over again. But then, and the attitude then was, if you wanted to get on in this country, you didn't go abroad. And someone said, "What did you do that for, boy? You'll never get a job now,
Okay.
However, he did. He persisted, and he got a senior registrar job in Charing Cross,
Something like that.
Charing Cross, where he trained. So he couldn't have done better. Very late. We all settled down. The school fees were paid. We got going again.
Yeah. Perhaps this was like maybe a good point to give us a bit of a picture of each of your children.
Yeah, we haven't really mentioned.
Yeah, we barely mentioned them.
Well,
we were talking a little bit about Uncle David, but yeah, maybe hear a bit about each.
Yes. What can I say about you? He was lovely because he was a very caring boy, David. And when I was on my own and your father was in Australia, he really did look after me. He used to light the fires and generally sort of, take his father's place as much as he could. And you were only 7 and 8. That's 8 by February.
Yeah.
And you were at a local school at that time. Just going to school
But just day school, not boarding.
Yeah,
day school.
Yes, at that point. And looking after me well, and you had a number of friends who used to go and see it, and just
living it up.
Yes. He has a little bit of difficulty. when he was born, he took a long while to breathe, so he was starved of oxygen, so he had to go into an oxygen tent. And that meant that his left side doesn't function very well. It has limited feeling in it, doesn't it? Would you put it that way?
Yes, I suppose so, yeah.
Which was a disadvantage being a boy. But he always laughed. And he overcame it. I'm sure you got bullied, but you never told me you did, and you always laughed it off. A great sense of humour. And, being boys and doing sport and all this sort of thing, it was hard, I would think.
I wasn't doing the sport.
I wasn't doing the sport. But you managed well with it, really.
How did David manage when other siblings came along? Because I'm the eldest sibling, and I think I was very jealous.
There was no jealousy. They all got on from the word go, didn't they?
I think so. I can speak for ourselves. We did, but...
So, Granny, where did Grandpa get appointed to when he became a consultant?
He got a... the question, I'm not sure the answer.
No, I can give you the answer. He got appointed finally at Red Hill.
When was it?
That was in 1968.
Was it? Right. So, yes. He got appointed to the Red Hill group of hospitals, which consisted of Epsom Hospital, Horsham,
Dorking,
Caterham.
Okay.
The group hospitals, basically.
And Red Hill, of course, itself.
Yeah.
So there was quite a lot of driving between hospitals, but he enjoyed it very much. The smaller hospitals he really enjoyed, much better than the bigger ones. And he was doing all sorts. He was the last generation, if you like, to do general surgery. After his time, or during his time, really, they started specialising.
Okay. I didn't realise that. So he was a general surgeon doing the whole gamut.
Yes, which they don't do now.
Yeah.
But then the surgery itself was so much simpler anyway. Then, there's none of this sort of recent technology which does marvellous things. It was just straightforward, more or less. Yes, so he would do, say, a morning at Dorking, and then go drive down to Horsham in Sussex, and then perhaps the next day do Red Hill and Caterham, and then there was outpatients as well. He was busy. He was very busy, but to our relief, he was also able to do a lot of private work. So he was building up our reserves once again, which was good. He did, I can't remember when 1971, or rather perhaps in 1970, it was suggested to him by the staff at Caterham Hospital that he should have his own private clinic, because he was getting a large number of patients, private patients, who were mostly covered with insurance. And the accommodation for them wasn't really very good at all. He turned it down, obviously. That he dismissed that idea for quite a while, and then he began to think about it. He was very unhappy latterly in the National Health Service. You weren't your own master. You had to do exactly what unprofessional people told you what to do. And he didn't lie down under that at all. It was not his way.
So what sort of NHS managers? Hospital?
Yes, that's right. Yes. Didn't like being told by a manager that he couldn't work after 5 because the technicians wouldn't allow it and that sort of thing. So in his time, you just go on till you finish.
Yeah.
He hated having to go down to tell the women in the ward who had to make special arrangements with children and everything. Hated having to tell them they've got to go home. He's not allowed to operate. It's too late. And he got more and more restless. They were setting up colleagues against each other by appointing a colleague to be the senior, not necessarily the senior surgeon, but was usually the senior one. to sort of hold meetings with all the other ones and lay down his idea of how things should be run, and more or less bullied you if you didn't do it. And they're all grown and elderly men, they should be able to behave in a grown-up sort of way and arrange things calmly and so on, but it wasn't working out for father at all. So he was getting a bit restless, although he still loved the job. If he was left alone to just do the work, he'd have been fine. It was all the bureaucracy that was gradually getting more and more and more. So he decided maybe there was some point in this suggestion. He started looking for somewhere, and we were extremely fortunate that there was a very big house in Caterham with 2 acres of land, just on the edge of the North Downs, which a lady owned whose husband had been a radiologist. So it had he'd done it from that house, I think, and he had died, and she wanted to sell this place to another medical person.
Okay.
Father came along.
So in luck.
Remember? What was her name?
I can't remember now.
No, I can't either. Anyway, she virtually gave it to us on a plate. She sold this property with this 2 acres of very valuable land for 27,000.
Okay. That was a good deal at the time.
Very good. You see it later. Very good, yeah.
One of the first things he did when he was appointed consultant was something he'd always wanted to do. He became a customer at Coutts Bank in London.
Yeah.
And that was a stroke of good fortune because his manager was a beekeeper, and Grandpa was very keen on keeping bees.
Okay.
So they got on famously. And the manager saw us through the financial side of buying this place, having a surgical wing built on, a brand new kitchen and all these things. And when our builders went bankrupt, we couldn't get going again in 6 months, he saw us through this without us having to worry too much, which was marvellous. So we kept the big house as it was. We were going to use it for administration and overflow patients, which we hope might happen one day, and built this new surgical wing, which was single-story, built like an H, with a sort of little open patio, like the bar of an H.
Yeah.
Plus, operating theatre, anaesthetic room, a new kitchen, and we decided that it would be too much, or there wouldn't be enough work just for Father to run, to use the place himself for surgery. So we opened it up to other surgeons, a general surgeon, ear, nose and throat, plastic surgeons, and Father was a general surgeon, and there was another general surgeon too, a colleague of Father's. And they used to bring their patients, and obviously the patients would pay the domestic side of it, as it were, and then the surgeons independently charge what they want. But we made a point of making it mainly for people, business people, who were ordinary business people, just, people who had insurance, but it wasn't very high. And it suited a lot of small businessmen in the area. They could have this operation at their own convenience as far as their business was concerned. And they were very grateful for that. We kept the fees as low as we could. It was and we had a very old friend's husband run the office and the accounting side of it, and generally managing the domestic side of things there. And it worked very well.
I think that one of the things about it is that even to this day, it's a credit to my father and mother, how it is still going as a hospital now.
It is.
So it's quite different, and obviously it's been changed around quite rightly so for adapting for the times. It's still there going.
Yeah, is it still called the North Downs?
Yes.
And is the surgical wing you built still there?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's been expanded and is flourishing, which is very nice because we bought the main house in 1971 and it's still going. Wow. So that is good. It doesn't often happen. It was successful. We employed only state-registered nurses with a couple, probably maybe 2 or 3 more junior ones to, do the bedside nursing, as it were, the more menial side of it, I suppose you would say.
Did you live on site? Did you sell your other?
Well, that comes, yes. Okay. I used to help out. First of all, there was a lot of work to do with making curtains and furnishing the place generally, and I took that on. And I had a friend to help me with that, the wife of the gentleman who was helping us in the office. She was excellent. She could sew, which I couldn't. And we furnished it all and, sort of the domestic side of it. Our chief trouble was the cooks. We had a series of cooks who would throw the saucepan at me, walk out at the most inconvenient moment, and so on. And this is where I used to come and I used to fill any gap that there was. I didn't do any nursing, as I think I've told you. I'd only injections when they were under the influence of anaesthetic. But I did office work when, perhaps the matron that we had left or something like that. And some days I would be doing office work, cooking the lunch, going back to office work and cooking the evening meal and arriving back about 9 o'clock at night. And it was hard going at times, but it wasn't always like that. And we eventually, after quite a long time, we settled down with the same domestic staff. And we had a chef called Stanley, and he kept things going in the kitchen, and life generally got a bit easier in that way. But, what were we saying? Oh, yes. Then, of course, I was finding it inconvenient. I was travelling from Purley to Caterham, which isn't very far. But while you're working, you feel you should be at home. While you're at home, you feel you should be working. And so we decided to sell Peaks Hill, have some profit, and rebuild what was the nurses' home in the grounds of North Downs. It was in a dreadful state, so we took it to pieces.
Okay.
And redid it, and I liked it up there. And there was a high brick wall between us and the clinic, so they couldn't see us.
Yeah.
And we made the garden and everything, didn't we? And it was so much easier to just pop across there at the end of the day.
You had all your meals supplied for you, didn't you?
You had all the meals supplied for me, yes.
Stanley would also cook for you. Yeah, great.
And he made life so easy. And I kept my domestic help, Mrs. Dudridge, that I'd had in Purley. She came by train from Croydon and helped me in the house. I didn't have much time for housework and so on. So she stuck with me as well. So that was it. And we ran that for 11 years. And Father decided to retire from the clinic. He'd given up the national health work by this time, by the way.
Yeah.
Should have mentioned that. And carried on with private work. And then he decided that really what he wanted to do was if he couldn't have been a surgeon, he wanted to do, and that was go down to Devon to farm. So we had a series of chances. We came across Undercleave. And that is a whole new chapter.
Yes. Sounds like the next chapter.
Yeah.
Well, very good. Thanks so much.
You've been listening to Project Posterity by Philip Crumpler, available at philipcrumpler.com.